Today, I am going to be talking about the second chapter of the book, How to Do Life, a Buddhist Perspective by Pralag Rinpoche. The second chapter is titled Relationship with Oneself and the Positive Self-Image. To begin with, in this book, he uses the word egoic, and I thought it might be good to define what that means. So I looked it up on the internet and found that it means of or relating to ego. So now you know what is meant by egoic. To introduce this chapter, he said there are four important relationships that we have, and he mentions them. And this is also looking ahead at future chapters. One is with oneself, which is the topic of today's chapter. The second is our relationship with the world. The third is our relationship with others. And the fourth, this may be the most difficult, our relationship with ultimate reality. This is one thing that Trale Khandro said is in this particular book, they tried to keep it free of as many terms, Sanskrit and Tibetan, as possible. Here they talk about, quote, authentic state of being, or, quote, ground of being. And to get technical, of course, what is being talked about here is our Buddha nature, our ultimate essence. Authentic state of being is a great term. We need to trust that we have this authentic state of being, that it's essential, it is the foundation, it's the starting point. He says even it's our genuineness, it is who we are, and therefore we really have to trust it and rely on it, because what we're trying to do is uncover it, bring it to fruition. We're not trying to get something that we're missing. It's not like we're putting together a puzzle, but there's some pieces missing. So we start with this, at least understanding intellectually that this is our ground of being, our authentic state of being. And then this gives us vision to look to the direction that we want to go. And I think it's good to go into what is meant by vision. I'm going to contrast vision with a plan. And vision is looking forward. You want to go in a certain direction, but you're really not solidifying things and saying, well, I'm going to do A, then B, then C, then D, and then as I go through this plan, eventually I will become enlightened. That as you travel the path, you start seeing things in different ways, and you start seeing doors that open up or that could open up that you could walk through that you didn't even know existed. And as you pursue your vision, you find that there are many ways, many choices, many different opportunities, and you really will not know how you got to where you want it to be until you get there. So vision leaves a lot of space, a lot of openness. It's very fluid, and it's easy to get stuck in solidifying things. We're talking here about possibilities and potential. From our egoistic point of view, we want things to be limited. We want things to be solid, that there's really little room for change. And this really constrains us. It leaves us feeling frustrated, discontent, feeling like a failure. At first, it can seem safe and familiar, but there really is no freedom in sticking with the old habitual patterns. I'm going to use the phrase same old, and I'll use that over and over again today. He doesn't use it, but this is really describing very well what he's talking about here when we are following our ego. In fact, what came to mind when I was a child, Again, I lived in a household with a mentally ill mother, and it was very traumatic for me. And I remember one of my favorite places, this was before I was, I'd say 13 years old, so under 13, was my parents' closet because it had a little window in it. And most closets don't have this, but a little window that you could look outside. It would be in there. You'd know I was in there. I was hiding, but I still could look through this little window. And that's what ego does. We get boxed in and we see through this little window a very narrow point of view. Now, I like puns, so I'm going to say I came out of the closet and I don't hide there anymore. That's a loaded term. Anyway, don't put additional meaning on that term. So, anyway, we need to recognize these limitations that our ego creates for us. He says we need to adapt a better attitude in daily life and to rely less on the past and less on present external circumstances. This gives us the freedom to at least have the opportunity to redefine who we are, to change, to recreate ourselves. Here is a quote. The fundamental point is that whatever mundane goals we wish to pursue should be in sync with our pursuit of spiritual goals. So within this freedom, then we want to keep both the immediate goals and the ultimate goal in harmony. We want to keep our awareness on both, and they are not mutually exclusive. They're not separate. We don't have to look at, as some people do, that if you're pursuing a spiritual life, you have to drop your mundane life and maybe go out and become a forest yogi or go to a cave or whatever. He's saying that you can pursue a mundane life, have a mundane job, but you can do that and minimize the involvement of your ego, that you can do it in such a way where you start having much more openness and freedom, fluidity, that ego can take us very quickly to negative places, obsessions, selfish preoccupations, but it doesn't have to be this way. Another way to put this is you don't leave your practice, your spiritual practice, on the cushion when you get up from meditating. You take it with you. He then says we need to take a deep, honest look at ourselves and answer the question, quote, how do I see myself? Now, my experience when I have discussed these things with other people, students, people that have attended some of my programs, I have found that a lot of people rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the Dalai Lama, 1 being Adolf Hitler, that they're maybe down at a 2 or maybe even a 1.2. It's amazing how negative we can be about ourselves. Again, it's this ego that wants us to excel, but instead of excelling in being good, it tries to emphasize how bad we are and how we have gone through and done this mistake, done that thing, done that thing. I like to call it, it's like a resume, or what is it, a CV, with all the things that you have done that proves that you really deserve to think that you are a 2. So it's good to get to know our inner critic and realize that this inner critic is coming from a very distorted, egotistical place, that it is opinion and not fact. On the other hand, this opinion has a huge impact on our lives. It takes us to all kinds of negative places and situations. We get caught up in egotistical fantasies, dreams, and aspirations. thinking how we're going to get even at the office with this one troublemaker or whatever. And so we have to develop a healthy sense of self. This is an extremely important part of Buddhist practice, and it's not contradictory to the idea of no self, which is frequently misunderstood, that this healthy sense of self is different from having a big ego. In other books, Kralik Rinpoche talks about a functional self. And I think this is a good way to look at this healthy sense of self. We need to have confidence, trust, and faith in our ground of being, our basic nature, who we are. We have to have confidence that we can accomplish what we want to accomplish. My running joke is if we've talked about no self as just being an absence of self, how could you use a self-serve gas pump? And of course, this healthy sense of self knows how to use a self-service gas pump without ego getting involved. This is not contradictory to the idea of no self. It's just a different way of looking at what we need to have to function in life and function well. So he says that low self-esteem is related to preoccupation with ego. It was kind of what I was saying earlier when I said that we get so attached to thinking that we are bad people, that we excel in being bad, that we want to excel in being a failure, being bad. And then, of course, comes the hopelessness because there's nothing that can be done about it because we think fundamentally we're a bad person, leaves us powerless. It leaves us depressed and in despair. Comparing ourselves to others, too, can be a huge problem. We compare ourselves to other, and it's amazing. We either come up really short or we come up that we are so much better than everybody else. And if you look into it, when you're feeling so much better than everybody else, underneath all of that, what's really motivating you is the feeling that you're worse than everybody else, and you got to prove that you're better than everybody else. Our egos get very complicated. We play all kinds of egotistical games with our ego. So when we're comparing ourselves with others, a lot of times is that we're following their values and not ours in this comparison. And we see others and we imagine that they're happy and we ignore their suffering. We wish that we had their happiness and we focus on our suffering. And as a result, we become too dependent on circumstances for finding happiness. We depend on circumstances to find fulfillment. And of course, circumstances change constantly. So a source of a healthy self-image is literally feeding ourselves positive thoughts and emotions, thinking of ourselves in positive ways. It's amazing if you really start sitting down and thinking and writing all the good things that you've experienced in your life. It becomes a very, very long list, but our ego tends to focus on all the negative things that we experience in our lives. And a lot of times it's just our ego interpretation of them being negative. Our ego does not see clearly. So we want to develop positive thoughts, positive emotions, keep reminding ourselves of this, be flexible rather than fixed when we look at who we are, to see possibilities, letting go of the past. If we hold on to the past, there's no room to grow. We're stuck in the past and we keep reliving the past. And of course, if we see ourselves as a victim, this stops the growth because a victim has two choices. Either they blame other people, and then you have to control other people. And of course, it's really hard to control the whole world. People have tried, dictators have tried, but it doesn't work very good. It always has a bad ending. And then if you blame yourself, then we go back into this idea of I'm a bad person fundamentally. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm hopeless. I'm helpless. And then you get depressed, wallow in despair, and so forth. Being a victim doesn't work, and blaming yourself doesn't work. Really, it's just another one of these worldly concerns. We have to become aware of when we start thinking of ourselves as a victim or start blaming ourselves. The past can't be changed. There's nothing you can do about it. It keeps you imprisoned. The remedy, Kralik Rinpoche says, is to imagine ourselves as the person that we want to become. He says, visualize this. See yourself freshly. Have a new beginning and have conviction that this is what you want to become. And again, remember to include this fluidity that as you approach that goal, that things are going to change and you might see things very different and you might want to see yourself a little differently. Nothing wrong with change. We want to see ourselves in a way that really directs our mind and our effort in a positive direction. We want to avoid a New Year's resolution type of approach where after a short while, oh, I give up. This isn't working. It's back to the same old, same old. I can't do it. Keep this vision in your mind and think about it repeatedly and even visualize if you want. And avoid thinking that it's just imaginary, that it won't make any difference at all. Or thinking that, well, I'm worse than other people. This might work for some people, but it's never going to work for me. That will get you nowhere. That will keep you exactly where you are. So our aspirations give us direction. They're very important points. They point us in the direction that we want to go. Without having aspirations, without having a broad view, then in a way you're like a piece of wood on a lake that goes in whichever direction the wind blows. So you don't even have control over where you are going. So part of this is envisioning for ourselves a greater and stronger sense of self-direction, self-worth, the ground of our being. And this is what gives us energy. It propels us to our goals. This is a quote here. We need a proper self-image if we are to free ourselves from the excessive influences of our ego. And he's got a pretty, shall we say, low opinion of ego. He said that our ego is the source of despair, depression, fear, anxiety. On the other hand, a healthy self-image weakens these and eventually eliminates them. With a healthy self-image, we have a, quote, I can do it attitude, end quote. So this allows all kinds of possibilities to appear. Things become much more spacious. And he uses the term that there is stability, but there's no stagnation. So here is a contrast between ego and a healthy self-image. This is ego's approach. I'll prove I'm the best. I'll show the world how great I am. Those are quotes. And this is self-obsession. If you don't feel you're great before you begin the activity, you won't feel great afterwards, at least not for long. And he said, this is like stagnant water. There's movement, there's bubbling, but the water isn't going anywhere. There's really nothing happening. Now, with a healthy self-image, you gather your resources, positive thoughts, positive emotions. You have trust in your fundamental state of being. You have a I can do it attitude. You have space to move into. You don't feel constrained. And this is like the steady flow of a stream, not a rapids, but a stream where there is movement, but there is stability. And here is another quote. If one can picture new possibilities, it is possible to be a writer, an artist, a business person, or a good parent, etc. One can more easily see avenues and pathways towards the goal. In other words, the world is full of possibilities if you are open to them and can see them. Now, it might sound like all of this is just a psychological exercise, and there's nothing in this that is spiritual. One of the things that came to my mind when you're talking about visualizing the you that you want to be is I know that athletic trainers will have the athlete visualize completing the task, kicking the field goal, and so forth. That's just a psychological exercise, but this is spiritual because we're joining spiritual practice and aspirations with our mundane activities. It's important to remember this, that we're using in a positive way aspirations and imagination as aids for our immediate goal, for a better and more meaningful life, and also for our ultimate goal of attaining enlightenment. So again, we're seeing these two goals as part of the same process, that we don't look for the mundane goal and forget about the ultimate goal. The sense of self-worth is based on our true nature, not on anything that we have gained or developed. This is important, that it's based on who we actually are, our ultimate nature, that we don't have to prove by accomplishments, spiritual accomplishments, that this is who we are. We have to believe this even if we haven't experienced it directly. This is where trust, and perhaps he doesn't really mention faith, but I'm going to. Trust and faith that this is inside of us, that what the Buddha taught is actually the truth. But with this trust, it'll lead us into unexplored areas, to new possibilities, new directions, new paths. Instead of being closed in and feeling trapped, feeling like there's no way out, it opens up. And when this happens, it confirms what you trusted, our true nature is actually there. I mean, even if you get a little glimpse of openness, this helps encourage one to go further and keep working at it. That this trust, I think he used the word environment. It provides the necessary conditions and environment for growth. He says, now we can get glimpses of this ground of our being, this state of authenticity, when we're meditating. If we have a short period, and it could be just an instant, where we're not disturbed by thoughts and emotions, and we're totally present, and realize that this is what you're experiencing here, even if it's an instant. I think this is a good analogy. You've stopped at a railroad crossing, and the train is going very fast, and it's just a blur. Then the train starts to slow down, and you start seeing a little space between the cars. That he's talking about this space of undisturbed awareness, free of thoughts and emotions, might be just that little gap between the two cars, one being a thought and the other car being another thought. That there's a gap, and you can be aware of that and recognize that. When you do, then this can help develop your confidence that this is your true nature. So the point that he makes is, don't rely on ego's identity to give us the vision to fulfill whatever we need. We have to depend on our true nature and a healthy self-identity. And if that's the case, then we have this tremendous potential. We can exercise it, and experience will follow. Then he says that the idea that humans are fundamentally flawed is a very popular way of thinking, but it is incorrect. It comes from egotistical, habitual thoughts and patterns and ways of thinking. It comes from judgment and criticism, guilt, and self condemnation. Quote. This is a long quote. I posted this on Facebook overnight when I was studying and preparing for this talk. I left out some things to kind of make it very concise. So I'm reading the whole quote here. Healthy self-image is accommodating. It is forgiving. It permits and allows. It does not demand perfection from us. Perfection is something that we aspire to. It is being gentle with oneself, wants and all accepting of oneself, forgiving one's failure and defects, and accepting that we can sometimes make mistakes and fail. By thinking like this, having that big vision and positive self-image, one can accommodate all aspects of oneself and still continue to strive for one's own betterment. I couldn't think of any better words to put that in. So from the ego's point of view, there is tension, anxiety. We're at war with ourselves. We guilt trip ourselves. We want to be perfect. We know that we're not, and we feel defeated, hopeless, helpless. All of this is not spiritual. It's just more pain, suffering, and ego. With a healthy self-image, we have kindness towards ourselves. We aspire to higher levels of development and perfection, yet we accept our imperfection. A mistake is a message, it's feedback, and we aspire for higher levels of development. We develop more positive thoughts and positive aspirations. As many of you know, I like to do, among other things, woodworking. And here is a saying goes with, you could say, craftsmanship of any kind. An amateur blames, a craftsperson works with their mistakes. So ego blames, it's my tool, it's the material, it's da 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 da. There's always something to blame for why you made a mistake. And a craftsperson, when the mistake happens, they work with it. This is what we need to do, is certainly be aware of our mistakes, but work with it and don't blame. With ego, things just get more complicated, more negative, more problematical. Believing is an important part of making life work. Believing in ourselves, that is. If we don't believe in ourselves or believe in something that we want to do, it won't go well. We're hesitant, we're too cautious, we quickly lose momentum, become distracted and sidetracked, and give up. So a sense of self-worth is extremely powerful as well as extremely important. It gives us momentum to our actions. It gives us better tools to work with life difficulties. We need to focus on the positive aspects of one's life. Even when things are difficult, we can focus on what we are capable of. When we find ourselves going over the past, let go of the past. Let go of things that you could have done, should have done, shouldn't have done. The past is over. It can't be changed. You can change your interpretation of the past, on the other hand. And that happens by opening up and starting to see with fresh eyes. We have to be aware of thoughts and emotions that we're having. By doing that, we can start catching our ego tricks and don't buy into them. An example that I like to use is when you find yourself in a negative mood, having negative thoughts, with awareness, you kind of see that as like the maintenance required light on your car. It means take a time out and do a little maintenance on your thinking and let go of these negative thoughts that are behind your negative feelings. And then a fresh start is in order. So being able to drop negative thoughts are really important. And in terms of propelling and momentum, with a positive self-image, that we can avoid reaching a point where we say, this is all that I can do, this is my karma. Yeah, you give up. That it's important to realize that karma determines where we are now, but where we're going is freedom of choice. We can make fresh choices, go in fresh directions, and experience freedom from our habitual egotistical patterns. So it's very powerful to realize that we can become better people, better parents, better artists, if you're an artist, better business people. He is not ruling out any of these things. It isn't that you have to become a monastic or go off and meditate for years. We can integrate a mundane life with a spiritual path, and they're not contradictory. So we're not limited by our past experiences. Our mind is limitless, and that this belief is a key point, that this propels us forward. The last point of the book is this comparison between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is a feeling that you aren't understood, aren't appreciated. You may be uncertain how people feel about you. You're feeling disconnected, isolated. All of this is, in his words, excessive ego involvement. It's kind of thinking, I'm the center of the universe. Why doesn't everybody else realize this? To contrast that is a state of aloneness. And this is believing in our authentic state of being and having aspirations and replenishing our view of ourselves with positive thoughts. This means that we don't need others to feed our ego. We become more open to others. We see more possibilities in relating to others than when we're lonely. When we're lonely, we want our ego to be fed by others. So in this state of aloneness, it makes it possible for love and compassion to arise. The question is, Christianity, I was brought up Catholic, and guilt and original sin is so deeply ingrained in Christianity, yet they talk about love and compassion so much. Why do they have that in there? And again, I am not a Christian theologian. I was brought up Christian. The Garden of Eden story comes from the Jewish tradition and was adopted by Christianity as well as Islam. The same story is in the Quran, said slightly differently. This seems to be a core part of Middle Eastern religion. Again, I'm not a student of world religion, so I'm not going to go up to other religions. But in Buddhism, the idea is that our fundamental state of being is not only pure, it's beyond pure. It's beyond good and bad. This is my own term. The Christians talk about original sin, and the Buddhists talk about original goodness. And I'm the only one I've ever heard use that term, and I hope it doesn't confuse people. But the idea is that this original purity, which is beyond purity, is there, and it's just buried, hidden, and we need to uncover it and develop it.